I am responding to how she's responding emotionally to some things. And again, how I'm responding is not healthy. Now, thankfully, I'm not aggressive. I'm not acting out. I'm not reacting. I have kind of shut myself off emotionally, but that's also not good as well. So thankfully, no, I'm not being aggressive. I'm not doing my old school default mechanism of being aggressive and turning into the Incredible Hulk and going from Bruce Banner to Incredible Hulk in 0.7 seconds. I'm not doing that anymore, which I'm very, very thankful for, and is a sign of growth, which I'm very, very thankful for. I also know that shutting myself off emotionally and not being emotionally present, not being emotionally available for my teenage daughter is also not healthy at all for either one of us. And just not healthy in relationships, period. And so, but I do recognize that it did serve me at some point in my life to have this as a survival mechanism, but I need to work through this and realize I need to handle this differently with my daughter, obviously, and not go to my default of cutting her off emotionally, so to speak. What is going on, EQ gangsters? So for those of y'all that are watching on YouTube, I apologize. It's gonna be a little shaky just because of the setup in my car. I don't have a solid platform here. So anyway, I apologize in advance. And just also want to thank you guys again, just being a part of the, my emotional growth journey, and then letting me be a part of your emotional growth journey. On my way to jiu-jitsu, which, as you guys know, if you've been following me for any length of time, know that is my therapy. That's my mental, emotional, physical, even spiritual therapy that I'm very, very thankful for. So thankful for. There's nothing like going to an environment where you get dialed in on a fairly regular basis. I'm getting to the point where I can hold my own with some of the folks, and then still will never catch up to some of the folks that just dial me in on a regular basis. And it's, man, I don't know, it's just good. The other thing too is learning for me. Learning is so good for me, just emotionally. And then also that immediate feedback. When you roll, you get immediate feedback of, like, real-time feedback. Okay, that worked, that didn't work, that worked, that didn't work. So, which is very helpful and very powerful in my opinion. So this episode is going to be sharing one of my current emotional challenges that I am working through. And so far not doing a super good job at working through it, but getting there. I'm getting there. So for those y'all that either have already been through the teenage years with your children or are going through the teenage years, you will find this, maybe you'll be able to relate to this. For those y'all that still have young kids or don't have any kids, you might not be able to relate to it, in terms of having your own teenager, but this still applies in relationships. So whether or not you've got a teenager, I think the lessons and some of the principles, you will be able to glean some insights and stuff, some takeaways. So the bottom line up front is I am finding myself shutting off emotionally to my teenage daughter. And therefore, there's a whole series of consequences. In fact, that's a great question. What are the consequences of shutting yourself off emotionally to another human being? And in this case, to somebody that I love and care about and that I spend a decent amount of time around? What are the consequences? How emotionally available, how emotionally present were your parents? Or whoever it was that your primary caregiver, whoever that was, because maybe, I've met a lot of people that were raised by their grandparents. How emotionally available and emotionally present were your caregivers? And so I know there are tons of, there's a lot of thoughts here about this. One is, I know it's a survival mechanism for me. It's a coping mechanism that I have learned that I still have got to unpack and figure out. I just need to do some more study and reflection and prayer stuff about why I do that. Why do I cut someone off emotionally as a survival mechanism? Now, obviously, the one side is it's so that I don't get hurt. So I know it's a self-protection mechanism, because here's the dynamic that's going on. And I don't want to share too much because I didn't get my daughter's permission to even kind of discuss this or share this. But I do want to share with you guys the challenges that I am having with my own personal emotional growth journey about specifically as it relates to my daughter. And she's an amazing kid. So that's, and not just because she's my kid and stuff, and I'm just this totally biased, unrealistic parent that, oh, my kid's just amazing. And no. Now, there's obviously areas that we're still working on with her, but she is very, very low drama, very, anyway, so it's just, I am responding to how she's responding emotionally to some things. And again, how I'm responding is not healthy. Now, thankfully, I'm not aggressive. I'm not acting out. I'm not reacting. I have kind of shut myself off emotionally, but that's also not good as well. So thankfully, no, I'm not being aggressive. I'm not doing my old school default mechanism of being aggressive and turning into the Incredible Hulk and going from Bruce Banner to Incredible Hulk in 0.7 seconds. I'm not doing that anymore, which I'm very, very thankful for, and is a sign of growth, which I'm very, very thankful for. I also know that shutting myself off emotionally and not being emotionally present, not being emotionally available for my teenage daughter is also not healthy at all for either one of us. And just not healthy in relationships, period. And so, but I do recognize that it did serve me at some point in my life to have this as a survival mechanism, but I need to work through this and realize I need to handle this differently with my daughter, obviously, and not go to my default of cutting her off emotionally, so to speak. So what's happening is, so a couple things, a couple dynamics here. So there's a big event that happened in her life that she has not fully worked through emotionally. And that was moving to Colorado. When we moved to Colorado at a formative time in her life, when she was 11, that was a very emotionally jarring experience for her, which is a whole nother lesson. Is that, so for her, that was an emotional injury and emotional trauma. Now, thankfully, it did not, she does not ever have to worry about, and has never had to worry about, emotional trauma coming from as a result of her parents abusing her. Thank God she has never, nor will ever, have to worry about that. Ever being emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually abused from her parents. That will never happen and has never happened, thankfully. And now, that being said, that doesn't mean that, her trauma that she has experienced of moving has not impacted her and has not been a very traumatic experience for her. For her, that has been a very traumatic experience for her, and is something that, you know, she hasn't worked through yet, that she still needs to work through. Because, and I just did, you know, every 2 weeks I host a men's group called mensgroup.com. It's not my group. It's actually a company called mensgroup.com, started by a guy named Sean. Forgive me, I don't remember his last name. I actually interviewed him on my podcast probably a couple months ago. If you can find the episode, Men's Group founder, you know, this guy named Sean, founder of Men's Group. And so every 2 weeks I host an emotional fitness men's group. And one of the things I talked about in there is you can't compare traumas. So you can't say that your trauma is less than my trauma, or that my trauma is worse or better than your trauma. Everybody's trauma is trauma to them. So you can say, well, yeah, Noble, but you weren't abused as a kid. Or you weren't, you know, and a lot of you guys know I was molested as a kid when I was 5, and again in college. But still, compared to some people, that's nothing compared to what some, but that's the thing is, we should never judge anyone else's trauma. Your trauma is trauma to you. My trauma was trauma to me. Because, you know, when we're kids, especially when we're kids, we, you know, that each event, life's event, hits us differently. And so, anyway, so that's one thing, is we can't compare trauma. It's not right, it's not fair, and you know, there is no standard body of that rates, okay, this trauma is legit trauma and this trauma is not legit trauma. Well, that's not, no one can decide that for anybody other than you. Okay, so this move was significant for my daughter, and like all of us, unaddressed emotions don't get better over time, they actually compound. Unaddressed emotions don't get better over time, they actually compound. So something that we got to work through with our daughter is, she at some point in her life has to work through this experience that has really impacted her. So so that dynamic, combined with just being a teenager, as a teenager, and I went through this too as a teenager, it's just in the teenage years, part of the human development of a human in the teenage years is figuring out your identity and your boundaries. And as a teenager, your boundaries expand, they grow, right? My daughter wants more respect, more freedom, more space, more her own identity now than she ever has before in her life. So when she was growing up as a kid, I could hug her and kiss her and cuddle her and, that kind of stuff. And nowadays, that does not fly at all. So she's in the phase where, do not touch me, don't get close to me, don't get near me. I am my own person. I want my own space. You need to respect my space, and you need to not come in my space under any circumstances. It's kind of the phase that she's in. And thank God I have done the emotional growth that I have done, because it would look very, very differently. I would have responded very, very differently when I was very emotional, unhealthy. Now, obviously, I'm still not responding the way that I need to her desire for that freedom and space and everything. But thankfully, it could be a whole lot worse. So I'm very, very grateful again that I am responding. I've got to change how I'm responding, but I'm not reacting anymore, I guess is what I'm saying. And so and also the other dynamic is, as a teen, which again, I went through the exact same thing, And the irony is how God works. We also moved. My family moved when I was going from freshman to high school, freshman to sophomore year in high school. We moved when my daughter was going from like 7th to 8th grade or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but something like that. So we moved a little bit later, but oddly enough, or ironically enough, I responded very, very similarly the way she did. So when I moved from freshman to sophomore year, I grew up in this very, very small town, rural town in Illinois, farming town. And then again, moved to a bigger city. For me, it was a much bigger city. So we moved from a town of 1,000 people in the whole town, and I had 26 kids in my high school class, to moving to a town of 10,000 people in the town and 400 or 500 people in my high school class. And I literally don't think that I spoke to my parents for an entire year unless they spoke to me. So if they directly addressed me, I would respond, but I'm telling you, it was not a lot of warm fuzzy. In fact, I was very angry. I had a lot of anger as a result of us moving, because again, my entire social network was, you know, how I received it was ripped out of my grasp, if you will. Because we moved again from that small town, and then we moved 2 hours away to for me, it was a much bigger city. Now, obviously in the big scheme of things, 10,000 people, 20,000 when the college was in session, is still a very, very small town. But for me, it was massive. My second high school had like 1,100 kids in it. So my second high school was bigger than my first town, to put things in perspective. So I was incredible. So again, just like my daughter responded, I responded. I was very angry that my parents ripped me out of my social network, my social circle, my social, you know, my whole social dynamic was completely shredded in the span of, you know, of a week when we moved. And so again, I understand the trauma, the injury that can come from a move. And again, we're not even talking about, again, not to compare trauma, but to like all my military buddies who have had to move their families 10 times during their children's childhoods, right? So again, but you know, it's not fair to compare trauma. So I experienced the emotional trauma very similar to my daughter, just from that big giant move. You know, my daughter was in one space for 11 years, and then we moved her out of her social circle. So it was very tough for her. Now, thankfully, she has some amazing homies in Colorado now, like some amazing homies. And we do too. So we're very, very thankful for that. Again, my challenge is this new phase. I say new, but you know, she's been a teenager for a couple of years. This phase of teenage life that she's in, where she wants all this space and wants all these, you know, boundaries, which I love and respect. I love and respect her boundaries, and I love honoring and respecting her boundaries and space that she is increasingly desiring as a teenager. You know, she wants more time with her friends. She wants less time with her parents. She wants, you know, she does not want any hugs and cuddles and kisses and stuff. And that's very hard for me, very hard, because I am a hugger, cuddler, and kisser, right? I'm physical touch. Now, thankfully, I'm emotionally healthier. Now, I didn't say healthy, but I'm healthier than I was 4 years ago. So I'm kind of aware of what's going on. And but what I've been mulling over and really chewing over is man, of how I'm responding now, right? I'm responding now by shutting down emotionally as a response to her wanting all this space, which again, in my emotional brain, I think it's my survival mechanism and coping mechanism of, okay, so I don't get hurt because I've got 3 more years and then she's out of the house. And it's kind of my way of anticipating her leaving the house at some point, right? That's the goal. It's the goal for her to go and grow, and become a functioning, independent member in society. But I guess the goal, I think, should be interdependence, not independence. Not where she's necessarily dependent on us as parents, emotionally, physically, spiritually, but that she's interdependent, that she wants to stay and be in a relationship with her parents as she goes and grows through these teenage years and on into her young adulthood once she leaves the house and stuff. And I've got to figure out how to drop these walls, these emotional walls that I'm putting up as a survival mechanism, as a protection mechanism, be able to stay emotionally present and emotionally available for my daughter when she wants to spend time with us. The other couple takeaways that I've talked to my wife about is I also want to pick up our level of intention as a family. So in a couple different areas. One, we have not done our family dinner ops it's been a hot minute. And I want to get back to at least a few times a week doing intentional family dinner ops where 3 times a week we are doing dinner together. And we've got kind of a process that we do when we do dinner ops. We've got a spiritual component to it where we read some Bible verses and stuff, some Bible passages. We've got a American facet to it where we read some founding document stuff and read some stuff about the history of our country. And then we've got some emotional component to it, emotional intelligence component to it, where there's some emotional exercises that we're going to be doing as a family 3 days a week. So that's one thing that we're going to change, that I'm going to change. And then the second thing is I've got to get back to daddy-daughter date nights, which I haven't done in probably a year. It's probably been a year since I've taken my daughter out on a date. So I want to get back into doing monthly date nights with my daughter to intentionally create times to intentionally connect with her. And then also continue my date nights with my wife as well, because that's another thing that I need to do to continue to model the emotional vulnerability and honesty and openness and availability for not just my daughter, but for my wife as well. So both, for both of them individually and as a family, and model the behavior that I'm wanting to show to my daughter as well. So those are some changes. And then also I need to work through these emotions that I have on, okay, Noble, let's figure out what's the origin story of why am I shutting up? Why am I shutting down and putting up my emotional walls with my daughter? What's going on there? Why am I doing that? And then kind of reverse engineer that. For those of y'all that are in the EQ Mafia, if you go to EQgangster.com, you can check out the EQ Mafia. But in there, we've got what's called the thought analyzer. That is a process to kind of reverse engineer the behavior and separate the behavior from the emotions, from the feelings, from the stories, and kind of reverse engineer that so that I can choose a different emotional response and maintain that emotional presence and emotional availability for my daughter, because these teenage years are critical. And I want to be able to launch her into her own young adulthood, having the emotional environment that gives her the emotional tools, the emotional agility, the emotional resilience, the emotional endurance, the emotional strength that she is going to need going into today's world. And then also for us, not just all those emotional tools, but also for us, the spiritual tools. I want her to have the spiritual tools and the spiritual agility, a spiritual endurance, a spiritual foundation that she's going to need as she goes into adulthood here in a few years. And, you know, so that she can handle and navigate the relationships that she's going to experience, whether she goes into business for herself, whether she goes to college or goes into a job or whatever she's going to choose to do, that she has all those foundations and tools that she needs to navigate the complexities of life. So anyway, that hopefully you guys got something out of that. Again, thank you. If this added any value, would love it if you wouldn't mind taking 15, 20, 30 seconds to rate, review, subscribe, share this podcast and stuff, this YouTube channel. If it was impactful for you, man, would love if you wouldn't mind sharing this with a friend or colleague. And again, if you just wouldn't mind rating and reviewing, that gives, it helps the podcast algorithms and stuff, you know, so that other people can hear and, you know, the message of emotional fitness and emotional health can be shared with more people. There's just a lot of hurting people out there. And most of us have not been trained on how to, you know, how to grow and have emotional intelligence and emotional tools and, you know, have an emotional fitness program. So thank you for being a part of this journey again. Emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally. Emotionally healthy leaders create emotionally healthy cultures and organizations, which lead to and maximize and optimize outcomes and results and performance.